Stablecoins are poorly named because people use that word to refer to many different things which have nothing to do with each other. They try to serve the same function, but they're fundamentally different. So the first kind is essentially tokenized bank accounts. You bring cash to someone's bank account, they give you tokens, you use your token on a blockchain, and then you take those tokens back to this person and you get cash. And that's what you might have with the CBDCs, what you have with Tether, with USDCs. That's what Libra wants or wanted to do. Very simple mechanism. It's also very clear why the peg is maintained, because if the token is somehow worse, is below its peg, what you'll do is buy the token and then redeem the token for cash, lock in an arbitrage. Conversely, if the token is above its pegs, then you bring cash to the bank account, get more tokens, sell them. Very easy, very straightforward. It's not censorship resistance because it depends essentially on someone holding a bank account, but it can be very convenient, and and there's several stablecoins which have been very successful. The second category focuses more on censorship resistance and tries not to depend on tokenizing someone's bank account. There's a so-called algorithmic stablecoins, but we'll see why again it's a misnomer and why they're so different from the first category. In that category, I would distinguish two. One type essentially tries to use some sort of cryptocurrency as collateral, and based on that collateral, create a token with less volatility with a stable value. That's one category. And there's the other one, which is based on a different approach, which is essentially wishful thinking. And so in the wishful thinking category, the very first to come to the scene, and I'm talking 2014, people were saying, hey, let's just create a token and we'll pretend it's worth €1. And then if everyone keeps pretending it's €1, it will be worth €1. Didn't work, obviously. There was another type which were, we'll vary the balance in people's wallets so that it's always worth €1, which doesn't make, it's not, sure, you have a coin which is worth €1, but one morning you'll have 10 coins, the next morning you'll have 20 coins, the next day you'll have 15 coins. So it's not stable by any means, right? You're just changing the display. It doesn't work. And then you have the kind of obfuscated version of this. One of my favorite one to explain the false off is basis. The idea of basis was that you'll have a token, and if the token is below its peg, well, that's easy. You just inflate. You create more tokens out of thin air. You sell them, and then voila, you have lowered your you have lowered the value of the token, and so you're back to your peg. What if it's under the peg, though? So what they would do is say, well, we need to remove them from circulation for a while. So we need to convince people to kind of like lock their tokens, not sell them, lock them for a period of time. How you do that? Well, you promise that you're going to pay them, but how do you pay them? Well, we'll inflate more. So you're saying, let's have an auction. We will keep removing tokens from circulation, and we will do so by promising that more tokens will be printed. So you have an auction on essentially the yield of those bonds for encouraging people to lock them. You might say, okay, you'll get 1 million token. You'll get 1 million token if you're willing to lock 900,000 tokens. Okay, no takers, all right. Okay, just lock 800,000 tokens and you'll get 1 million tokens. When you do a mechanism like this, you essentially have a system with two attractors. One attractor is that you indeed are holding your peg, and that happens if basically generally the demand to hold your token keeps increasing. You'll hold your peg. If you have a shock in a demand on your token, you can actually have the other attractor, where essentially, even though you keep promising people more and more return for locking their coins, the fact that you're promising these returns creates inflation expectations, and the inflation expectation actually bring more selling pressure. And so you have another attractor, which is zero. So basis doesn't work, cannot work. I'm a little frustrated because very early on I had VCs write to me and ask me like, oh, do you think this, can you comment on this thing? Would it work? And I wrote this nice and long email explaining the financial economics of why it doesn't work. It was not like the 1-minute version I just gave you. It was very detailed. And they were like, well, it seems interesting anyway. There's a tendency to kind of pretend that you cannot evaluate the technology ever. And that's very weird. People should be able to think in terms of first principle about these things. So let's look at the more interesting category, which is the one backed by actual collateral. And there's a bunch of like bad stablecoin ideas which don't use collateral and just they just don't work. They go against like basic financial principles. The one which are collateralized also go against some financial principles, unfortunately. And one of those principles, a very, very basic one you see in finance, is that if you don't have convertibility, you don't have parity. If I don't have a way to take a dollar or a euro out of my bank account and convert that into a stable coin, but also back and forth, if I don't have a way to do that, you're not going to have parity. There's a very, very striking example of this. It's such a strong law. There was a merger at one point between Royal Dutch and Shell, both oil companies. So the two companies merged, but they were still shares listed on two exchanges, I think in London and in the Netherlands. And those were identical shares. They were shares for the same company. They gave you the same voting rights. They gave you the same dividends. So as economic instruments, they were essentially the same. But for some reason, you couldn't just take one share from one exchange and convert it into a share from the other exchange. You couldn't do that. And for years, there were significant differences in the value of these stocks. If you're thinking of this, well, they're the same stock, they should have the same value, but they didn't because you couldn't do the conversion. Now, in a sane world, you would have, the company should have done the conversion. Basically, they should have bought back the cheap share on one of the exchanges and emitted them on the other exchanges. They didn't do that, or the people who were holding the expensive one should basically have sold it and bought it on the other exchange. But it just didn't happen because you need, the markets just by themselves are not going to be sufficiently rational. You need arbitrages to make them rational. And if you can't arbitrage it, you're not going to have a peg. So now this is a very, very strong example because it is with identical instruments. And we're not even in the realm of having comparable instruments here. That's not even what happens. So how does this collateralized system work? The best known in this space is probably MakerDAO and DAI. So I'm going to use it as an example. So in MakerDAO, and I will use the old MakerDAO system, which was single collateral. The argument works as well if you're using multiple collateral, but it's just easier for my video to just talk about this one. So in this one, you take a cryptocurrency, you lock it into a vault, or what they call a CDP, and then against that collateral, you can issue some sort of stable instrument that they call DAI. So you issue your DAI. Now again, how do we maintain the peg for DAI? Okay, so if DAI is if DAI is too cheap, you need to have less DAI. So you need to convince people who were creating the CDPs and putting DAI out to take their DAI back. So maybe you can charge them for this. And there's a thing called the stability fee, which is if the stability fee is 6%, for example, and I emit 100 DAI after a year, I might have to bring back 106 DAI if I want to see my collateral back. So that's one mechanism. You are going to charge people, and you can charge them more somehow if you're below the peg. So that's the easy case. There remains a question of what do you do with this fee, and in the case of DAI, they just pay it to people who hold DAI. So if you hold a version of DAI called continuous DAI, instead of having something which has a peg, it actually slowly grows against the peg. So already it's not pegged. It's not a stable instrument because it can actually appreciate slowly against it. Now, a lot of the volatility is gone, which is great. You have some stability, but it's not redeemable for a fixed value. They kind of obscures that a little bit by saying, no, it's redeemable for a fixed value. It just so happens that you get paid more tokens. But really, if you look at CDAI, the continuous version, which wraps the stability fees that get paid to DAI holder, you see that it can actually slowly appreciate against the peg. But there's a problem, which is that only works one way. And you have to balance two groups of people. You want to balance the people who want to hold your less volatile, somewhat more stable instrument, and the people who are going to create it. So what's the incentive for creating it? Well, there's basically two incentives that people have. One is they might want to hold the cryptocurrencies. They don't want to sell it, but they want to make a purchase. So they'll emit, for example, some DAI, buy something, and then later on they buy the DAI back, and they close their vault. So that's one use case. And sometimes the thing that they want to buy is more cryptocurrency. And so some people have been using this for leverage, for example. That's a very common use case. So if you have a ton of people who want to use this for leverage, and very few people who are actually interested in holding like this kind of like weird instruments that's stable-ish, then that's great. You're going to have a high stability fee. you'll say, okay, I'll hold your DAI, but you gotta pay me for this. And I'm like, sure, I'll pay you. I want leverage. I'll pay you. Okay, so that's why for a long time you had this stability fees around 6-8% and so on and so forth. That's the easy regime. The harder regime is what happens if you actually have a ton of people who want to hold DAI, but not many people who are interested in creating CDPs, because they say, well, to create a CDP, I need to hold a very risky cryptocurrency, and I don't want to hold that much cryptocurrency. One thought experiment you can have is what happens if everyone wakes up tomorrow, everyone who has a Euro bank account wakes up tomorrow, and they say, it's so convenient to be on a blockchain that I want to convert my euros into some sort of algorithmically stabilized token. Not a good idea. This is a thought experiment, right? This is not. I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's a good idea. But this is a way to understand what the problem looks like by taking an extreme example. So one day, €1 trillion worth of cash tries to get onboarded onto a chain which has like a few billion of tens of billions of collateral available. That's not going to work. You just don't have enough collateral. And some people are under the impression and say, aha, but if they all want to hold this stabilized instrument, then the increased demand for the stabilized instrument will create increased demand for the underlying cryptocurrency, and so the size of the collateral will grow with the demand. But that's not true. That is not actually true. Demand for a DAI-like instrument does not create demand for the underlying cryptocurrency, especially once you hit a stability fee of 0. Once you hit a stability fee of 0, there's basically no connection between the two. And what you need is a negative stability fee. You want to be able to say, okay, I desperately want to hold this. I want to hold this so much, this stabilized instrument, that I am willing to pay people to hold risky collateral so that they can emit it. And unless you can have this negative, unless you can have this this kind of like negative stability fee, the system is not workable. So historically, what MakerDAO did is they tried to replace this. They tried to create this negative fee through risk. So they had this global settlement mechanism that said, well, if we're too far from the peg, we have a governance mechanism where we can trigger global settlement. You are increasing the supply because people might think, hey, I know I can sell this DAI for 1.2, and in this global settlement, only one of my collateral will go out. But because it's risky, there's going to be dead weight loss. Like, no one wants to basically hold that risk, and you can do a lot better if you just have a payment, if you just have a negative stability fee. So the only mechanism is to have a peg that either that kind of like slowly, or smoothly, at least not necessarily slowly, but smoothly increases above 1 or smoothly decreases above 1. And I would say that if you want to be successful, your stable instrument is successful when it's actually in the negative regime. That's when you've made it, because people actually want to hold it more than people want to produce it. And that's when demand for the stable instrument actually turns into demand for the risky instrument, because it becomes subsidized by people who want to shift the volatility away from them. And I would say any design for a stable coin that doesn't have this mechanism, this payment mechanism, is in some sense broken. And it's also, I think, again, why I don't like the term stablecoin. I try to use RoboCoin because you have this kind of like robotic cybernetic loop. It's not going to be redeemable for a fixed value. You can't do that because you don't have convertibility. You can do something that's very close. You can do something that's extremely useful, but you can't do that. And I feel that some people, and I worry that, but you can't do that. And you don't want to sacrifice this financial soundness of the system to kind of try and pretend that you have a stability, because you can't. My point generally is that there's convenience in having something that's stable-ish, and there's inconvenience in having something that's volatile. And so if you don't have a way for the people who have the convenience to pay the people who have the inconvenience, your market is not going to clear. Well, thank you for watching. And if you thought that was interesting, I'm going to put out more videos. So click like and subscribe. Thank you.